The day I was bought, the sky wasn't blue. It was the kind of gray that settles into your bones and makes you forget there was ever warmth in the world. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to taste, and the stench of sweat, smoke, and spilled beer clawed at my throat. I stood barefoot on splintered wood, my wrists rubbed raw by hemp rope, and though my dress was torn and my shoulders sunburnt, I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Not anymore. They barked numbers at me like I was a crate of spoiled fruit and not enough flesh on her bones, someone muttered. Too much dirt on her face, another chuckled. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the silence I wrapped around myself like armor. No tears, no pleading, just silence. Because once they know you're still alive in there, they try harder to kill what's left. And then he raised his hand. He didn't speak, didn't even step forward. Just lifted 2 fingers from the back of the crowd. Dusty coat, brim of his hat pulled low, his horse waiting behind him like it knew not to move without being told. The auctioneer hesitated. $3? He called. And even the crowd laughed. Someone spat. Another man shouted, "Too much!" But the gavel fell anyway. Just like that, I was his. I expected him to drag me, to sneer, to grip my arm too tight like the last one. But he walked up slow, like he had all the time in the world, and when he reached me, he didn't say anything. Just took out a knife and cut the rope at my wrists, then stepped back like he was offering me a choice follow or stay. I followed. I didn't know his name. I didn't care. All I knew was that for the first time in years, no one had touched me with cruelty in their eyes. We rode in silence out of that place. The horse's gait was steady, and I held the saddle with hands that didn't know how to trust what they were gripping. Behind us, the town of Dryvale shrank into nothing, just smoke and jeers swallowed by the distance. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't ask why he bought me. I just watched the sky start to darken as the sun bled out behind the hills and tried to remember the last time I'd seen a road without a chain on the end of it. By nightfall, we stopped under a crooked pine where the wind whispered like it knew too many secrets. He dismounted first, unhooked a small canteen, and passed it to me without a word. I drank, slow, waiting for the twist, the demand. None came. He didn't speak that night. Didn't try to touch me. Just handed me a blanket and lay down 10 feet away like I might stab him in his sleep. And that space he gave, that silence, was louder than any words I'd ever heard. I didn't sleep. I watched the fire burn down to coals and listened to the steady rhythm of his breath. Whoever he was, he didn't move like a man who needed company. He moved like someone who'd walked alone for so long, he forgot what sharing meant. When the stars blinked cold above us, I curled tighter in the blanket and told myself this wasn't freedom. It was just a different cage. But deep in my chest, something disagreed, something small and stubborn that hadn't died yet. And that scared me more than any man ever had. By morning, the fire had turned to ash. Pale blue light seeped through the trees, and the world felt colder than it had any right to be. I sat up slow, every bone in my back reminding me how long I'd gone without sleep worth calling rest. He was already awake, sitting on a flat rock, sipping coffee from a tin cup like we'd been traveling together for years. He didn't look at me, didn't ask how I'd slept, but he poured a second cup and set it down beside me like that was answer enough. I didn't thank him. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because my mouth had forgotten how gratitude sounded. I just held the cup and let the warmth bleed into my hands while I watched the steam curl upward and vanish. We rode again not long after that. I never asked where, and he never offered. The road curved eastward into dry hills, the kind of place the world forgets, where the land keeps its secrets and the wind erases every footprint by dusk. I kept expecting something to shift a word, a threat, a price, but it never came. He didn't speak unless he had to, and even then it was just enough to keep us from riding off a cliff. By the third day, we stopped in a place that barely deserved the name settlement. 5 shacks, a broken trough, and a half-dead dog watching the road like it hated hope. He traded a silver coin for grain and salt, left a sack of dried beans in return. When we mounted up again, the man behind the counter gave me a look not cruel, just confused. Like he couldn't figure out why a man would spend money on a woman and not even look her in the eye. That night, as we camped beside a dry creek bed, I finally asked, "Why do you boom?" My voice cracked. Not from weakness, from rust. He didn't answer right away, just tossed another log on the fire and watched it spark. "Didn't like the way they looked at you," he said eventually. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't kindness. Not exactly. But it also wasn't ownership. And that alone was enough to make something in me ache, something I didn't have words for yet. I chewed the dried meat he gave me and stared into the fire. He sat across from me, legs stretched out, hands folded in his lap like he had nothing left to carry. But I could see it the way his shoulders sagged just a little too much. The way he flinched when thunder rolled far off over the hills. This man was running from something too. Maybe not chains, but something heavy, something sharp. The next morning, I woke to find a saddlebag packed for me bread, a canteen, even a small bar of soap wrapped in cloth. He didn't say why. He just handed it to me and pointed toward the hills. "We ride through there, place on the other side. Used to be a farm." I didn't ask who it belonged to. I didn't ask if it was still his. I just followed, because following was easier than standing still. The land grew rougher as we went. Cacti thick along the trail, the wind louder, the sun mean. But he rode like a man who knew every turn of this path, every stone, and I watched his back like it held a map to somewhere better. When we reached the ridge, I saw it. A cabin barely standing, roof half collapsed, barn doors swinging like tired arms. Fence line chewed through by time and storms. But it was land, it was space, and it was empty. "This is yours?" I asked, stepping off the horse like I expected the ground to vanish. He nodded. "Left to me by someone who didn't have much use for it anymore." I walked to the porch. Every board creaked under my feet, but none gave way. I ran my fingers along the railing. Dust came away, thick and gray. But beneath it, I felt wood that hadn't yet rotted. Just waiting. "Why bring me here?" He stood beside the fence, looking out at the field, dry, overgrown, angry with weeds. "Because it's quiet," he said. "And you looked like you needed that." And there it was again, that ache. That unbearable, silent offer, not of safety, but of space. That night, I swept the porch. Not because he asked me to, because I wanted to. He chopped firewood while I cleared the hearth inside. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Something unspoken passed between us, in the scrape of broom bristles and the thud of the axe, a language older than words. The language of survival, of rebuilding. The stars came early. We ate beans by firelight, sitting at a table that wobbled every time I breathed too hard. He gave me a blanket and pointed to a cot in the corner, then stretched out by the fire like always. Still 10 feet away, still asking nothing. I didn't sleep. I just listened. To the wind, to the shifting wood of the cabin, to the steady breath of a man who could have taken everything from me but didn't. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew this. He'd bought me for 3, and hadn't touched a single piece of me since. Whatever kind of man that made him, I hadn't met one like him before. And part of me, the small part still alive, wanted to see what came next. By the time the sun rose, I'd already been outside for an hour. I didn't have a reason, not one I could explain. I wasn't used to places staying still. Everywhere I'd ever known had been something temporary, a wagon, a cell, a shack that belonged to someone else. But this place, even in its brokenness, didn't feel borrowed. The earth was hard beneath my boots, cracked from sun and neglect. Weeds had claimed most of the land, but between the patches of ruin I could see what it might have been. A path once walked daily. Fence posts, long since surrendered to weather. Empty troughs that once held water. It was like stepping into a memory that hadn't belonged to me. He found me by the garden bed, or what had once tried to be one. I was kneeling, pulling at the stubborn stalks with bare hands, dirt wedging beneath my nails. He didn't say anything. Just watched for a while, arms folded across his chest like he didn't want to interrupt whatever had taken root in me. "You planning on planting something?" he asked after a moment. "Don't know yet," I said, not looking up. Just tired of things staying dead. He gave a quiet grunt, not agreement, but understanding. After that, we fell into a rhythm, the kind that didn't need explanation. In the morning, I swept the porch, checked the corners for rot, sorted the rusted tools that still had some life left in them. He fixed the door to the barn, replaced the cracked hinge on the cabin window, patched the gaps in the wall where the wind used to whistle through at night. He never told me what to do, and I never asked what he wanted. That silence, it should have been uncomfortable, but somehow it felt like the only language we both trusted. There was something in the way he moved, not lazily, but like a man who'd carried burdens that didn't let you walk too fast. His steps were careful, his eyes even more so. And when he spoke, it was never loud, just steady, like every word cost something. On the fourth day, I found a tin box beneath the floorboards while sweeping out the bedroom. Inside were old letters, faded by time, some of them stained with what looked like rain or maybe tears. I didn't open them, didn't need to. Just set the box on the windowsill, not wanting to hide it again. He noticed it that evening, running a cloth over his hands after patching a leak in the roof. "You found his letters?" he said. "Yours? My brother's. This was his place before it was mine." I didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer, but his hands tightened for half a second before going still. We shared cornbread and beans again that night, same way we had every night since we arrived. He passed me a piece first, then poured coffee for both of us like it was a ritual we'd had for years. The table creaked beneath the weight of his elbows, and I caught him looking at me, not hard, not invasive, just looking. "You plan on staying?" he asked finally. I should have had an answer. Should have said something smart, something safe, but I didn't. I just stared into my coffee like it might show me the future. "I don't know," I said. "This is the first place I've been where the floor didn't feel like it could fall through." He nodded once, like that was enough. And it was. The next morning, I asked where the nearest well was. He pointed south, past a ridgeline and into a grove of dead trees. "It'll be dry this time of year," he said, "but you can still find water if you know where to dig." So we went together, walked the trail with empty canteens and a shovel slung over his shoulder. He didn't walk in front of me, didn't walk behind, just beside. The way people do when they're not guarding or guiding, just being. At the well, we found more than water. Bones of an old mule, dried and sun-bleached. A rusted tin bucket hanging by a single chain. And silence, the kind that presses down on your chest until your breath comes out thin. "Someone used to live here?" I asked. "Whole family," he said. "Gone now." He said it like he'd seen it happen, like he'd watched them disappear and never found a way to stop it. When the bucket finally brought up something wet, he handed me the first drink. I hesitated, unsure why that made my throat tighten more than thirst ever had. But I drank. And when I handed it back, his fingers brushed mine just for a second and something in my chest moved. Not fear, not hunger, something else. Recognition. That night, he built the fire closer to the porch. I sat with my knees tucked up, watching the shadows stretch long over the hills. He whittled a piece of wood, not with any real purpose, just the kind of thing hands do when the heart is still working through things. "You ever kill a man?" I asked, before I could stop myself. His knife paused for a moment, then kept moving. "Yes." The word dropped between us like a stone in a shallow river. No splash, just impact. "Or?" He nodded. "And after?" Another pause. Then, "One more. Deserved it." That was all he said. But it was all I needed. There was a line in his voice, not regret, not pride, just truth. I didn't tell him about the men I'd seen die, the ones who thought they owned me, the ones who didn't live long enough to find out they didn't. But maybe he already knew. Maybe that's why he'd cut the rope from my wrists and never asked for my name. He wasn't saving me. He was giving me room to stand up on my own. By the end of the week, I'd cleaned out the cabin, stitched the torn curtains, and found a small bag of seed potatoes hidden under the stairs. I showed him, holding them up like some treasure I didn't know I was allowed to have. "You want to plant those?" he asked. "Think they'll take?" "Only one way to find out." So we did, together, kneeling in the dirt, turning it over until the ground looked ready to be trusted again. He dug. I placed the seed. We didn't talk much, just worked in a quiet rhythm that felt more sacred than silent. And when we were done, he stood and looked at the plot like he could already see the green breaking through. "You believe in second chances?" I asked, wiping my hands on my dress. He thought about it. "I believe in doing something better the next time around," he said. "Call it what you want." And maybe that was enough. Because in that moment, under the setting sun, surrounded by nothing but dust and promise, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, but the start of it. The morning came heavy, pressing down with a heat that clung to the skin. The clouds sat still, thick and low, like they hadn't made up their mind whether to rain or suffocate the land with silence. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel slower footsteps, thoughts, the beating of the heart. I woke up before him, not from a dream but from the absence of one. I didn't remember falling asleep, just that the sound of the wind had been replaced with a strange stillness, the kind that leaves you feeling watched, even when you're alone. I stepped outside. The ground was warm, too warm, and the horizon glowed faint orange like a fire had licked it during the night. Nothing burned, but something felt scorched inside me anyway. The potato rows had shifted slightly. Not disturbed, just bent, like something had passed between them that didn't belong. I didn't call for him. I walked the perimeter of the land alone, keeping my steps soft, my ears sharper than usual. Every few yards I crouched, running my fingers through the dirt. No footprints, just tension, the kind that settled in the gut before the mind could explain it. By the time I returned, he was awake, seated on the porch with a tin mug in one hand and a rifle resting across his lap. He didn't ask where I'd gone. He just took a sip of his coffee and said, "Something doesn't feel right today." I nodded, lowering myself onto the wooden steps beside him. I felt it too. We didn't speak much after that. Didn't need to. The quiet between us had grown familiar, not empty, but full of questions neither of us was ready to ask out loud. Later that day, he brought out 2 sets of old traps, rusted at the edges but still sharp where it counted. He showed me how to set them, how to mask the scent with ash and dry leaves. It wasn't for animals. I could tell that by the way he checked the wind and scanned the hills like a man who had done this before, long ago. "Do you think someone's coming?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the final trap with slow, precise hands and looked out toward the southern ridge. "They always come," he said. "Sometimes they're ghosts. Sometimes they're worse." I didn't ask what he meant. I already understood. The dead don't knock. That night, we moved the table closer to the fireplace. Not because of cold, but because of comfort. It was the first time I noticed how much he lingered in the small rituals, how he wiped the table clean twice, even when it didn't need it. How he folded the cloth napkin on my side of the table before handing me a plate. It was strange. The things that made a place feel real. A spoon passed without a word. A nod at the kettle when it was ready. The soft sound of chewing in a room where no one was afraid. But comfort didn't last long. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of rustling outside, not the wind, not an animal. Something heavier, clumsier, human. He was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed, shotgun across his knees. He didn't look surprised, just tired. "Back room." "Stay there," he said. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. But something in the way he looked at me made my legs listen. I slipped into the storage room, a narrow space lined with shelves, jars of dried beans, and the scent of old wood. I knelt beside the wall and pressed my ear against the boards. Every sound was louder in the dark. A creak, a step, silence, then voices. Low, male, 2 of them. "You sure this is the place?" Tracks said so. Someone's been digging, planting. Could be squatters. Could be her. My stomach nodded. They weren't here for him. They were here for me. And I had no idea who they were. or how they knew I was still alive. There was a pause. Then the distinct click of a rifle being cocked. My fingers dug into the floor, but I didn't hear a shot. I heard his voice instead. Calm. Controlled. Back off my land. You alone, old man? Not today. They laughed. A short, ugly sound that bounced off the trees. Then I heard the crack of a trap snapping shut. A scream followed. Not just pain, panic. The other man cursed, his footsteps stumbling backward. Then a second snap. More screaming. The silence after that was heavier than the ones before. Eventually, I heard him walking back toward the house. Slow, steady, like someone used to cleaning up messes without making noise. He opened the door and set the shotgun against the wall like he hadn't just maimed 2 men in the dark. They'll live, he said, pouring himself water. But they'll remember not to come back. I stepped out of the back room, eyes adjusting to the firelight. He didn't look at me, just stared into the flames. They were looking for me, I said. He nodded. Figured as much. You still want me here? He finally looked up. Not angry, not surprised, just honest. 3 soft taps on the back door. Not the front. Not our signal. Another one of theirs. He looked at me. I shook my head. Whoever was knocking didn't belong. Then came the voice. Feminine. Soft. Familiar. Please, I need help. My blood went cold. I knew that voice. It belonged to Claire, a girl who didn't survive the fire. Or at least, that's what I thought. She's dead, I whispered. She burned with the others. He didn't speak, just stared at the door, breathing slow. Then she spoke again. Only this time, it wasn't her voice. It shifted halfway through the sentence. Became deeper, hungrier. You'll open eventually. I raised the gun. He placed a hand on mine. Not yet. We waited until the sun rose, until the voice vanished, until the light made the world seem normal again. But normal had died in the night, and something had taken its place. The next morning, we found symbols carved into the trees. Circles within circles, burn marks at their centers. I didn't know what they meant, but he did. Warding marks, he muttered. From the old language. Warding who? He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, fear wrapped in memory. Warding us, he said, because they think you're cursed. The days blurred after that. Every morning we found something new. A rabbit nailed to the gate. A fire pit still smoking in the woods. A message written in ash on the barn wall. The child must return. He stopped feeling afraid. There wasn't time for fear anymore. Just planning. We mapped the land, drew escape routes, set traps, and every night we took turns sleeping, except neither of us really did. We were waiting for the final letter, for the night when they wouldn't knock, when they'd just come through the walls. One afternoon, we found something by the river. A boy, barefoot, dirty. Eyes like mine used to be hollow and hiding something deeper than pain. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just held out a piece of cloth, black, charred at the edges. It was mine. From the night of the fire, he had been there, or worse, he had been sent. I stepped back. He didn't follow. He just stood there, waiting for something I couldn't give. And then he said, in a voice too old for his age, he said, "You'd understand." Then he walked away, into the woods, gone. That night, I told the old man the rest, that I wasn't just a runaway. I was the last survivor of a ritual that didn't finish. That father believed I carried something in me, something ancient, something he wanted to control. That the fire didn't stop it, just delayed it. And now they were coming not just to bring me back, but to finish what they started. He didn't flinch, didn't question. He just said, "Then, we'll make our stand here." I looked at him, really looked. And he realized this wasn't just his home anymore. It was our fortress. Not made of bricks, but of choice. of two broken souls deciding that history would not repeat itself. Not here. Not this time. And so we waited. Together. For the war we never asked for. With nothing but a promise between us. If they came for one, they'd face us both. Some storms don't begin with thunder. They begin with silence. Not the kind that comforts you, but the kind that presses against your ears, waiting to see who speaks first. That's how it felt the next morning. No birds, no breeze, just stillness. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. We didn't speak at breakfast. He made tea. I poured mine but didn't drink. He cut bread, then forgot to eat. We were both pretending. Pretending the night hadn't happened. Pretending the knock at the back door wasn't still echoing through the walls. Pretending we weren't counting how many bullets we had left. There's something awful about waiting for something you already know will come. It strips you down, makes you look inward. And that's where the ghosts are. Around noon, he took me into the woods. He didn't say where we were going, just told me to bring the shovel. We walked for half an hour, deeper than I'd ever gone before. Trees leaned in tighter. The air felt old, like even the wind had history here. Then we reached a clearing, and there it was. A stone, no markings, just a single weathered rock in the center of the earth. This is where I buried her, he said. I didn't ask who. He knelt beside it, resting a hand on the surface. My wife. 15 years ago. The words didn't come easy. He said them like each one had a cost. She died because I was too slow. I heard the glass break. I ran. But by the time I reached the stairs, his voice cracked. They were already gone. House still burning. He closed his eyes for a moment. They didn't want her. Just me. She was collateral. Then he looked at me. Don't let anyone become your collateral, boy. Not again. I wanted to say something. Anything. But what do you say to a man who's already buried everything he ever loved? So I did the only thing I could. I stayed silent. Let the wind move through the leaves. Let the past have its moment. When we got back, we didn't speak again for hours. He sat on the porch, carving something from wood. I stayed near the window, watching the edge of the forest, counting the shadows. And that's when I saw it. A figure. Just for a second. Tall, cloaked, standing motionless between two trees. By the time I blinked, it was gone. But I knew. They were closer now. They were watching. Waiting. Just like us. That night, I dreamed of the compound again. But it was different this time. I wasn't a child anymore. I was standing at the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the others, those who never escaped. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths sewn shut. Father stood above them, arms wide. Look what you left behind, he said. Then they began to scream. Even with their mouths closed, the sound poured out of them like smoke choking me, filling the sky, turning the dream into fire. I woke up gasping. He was already awake, sitting by the stove, loading a rifle. You too? He asked quietly. I nodded. We didn't need to explain. Some dreams don't come from sleep. They come from memory. We spent the next day setting traps. Ropes between trees, tripwires, nails under leaves, bottles filled with glass shards hanging from the roof edges, one tug and they'd fall like thunder. I was surprised how fast he moved. How precise. Like he'd done this before. And maybe he had. Maybe his past wasn't so different from mine. At one point he looked up and said, I used to work for men who made ghosts, but I was always the one sent to clean up after. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Some truths sit heavy even in silence. Later, I found something I wasn't supposed to. A photograph. Tucked between two books on the shelf. It showed him in a uniform. Younger, eyes harder. Standing next to another man, a man I recognized. Father. Not as he is now, but younger. Smiling, holding a child. The caption on the back was faded, but I could still read the last word. Brother? He didn't confront him. Not yet. But I understood now why he took me in. It wasn't pity. It was guilt. That night, we lit no candles. Darkness was safer. And in that darkness, I finally asked, "Do you believe I'm cursed?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I believe you survived what no one else could. And people like that always get called cursed." He paused. "But I think you were just born in the wrong fire." I didn't answer, but those words stayed with me longer than any prayer ever did. 2 hours before sunrise, the dog started growling. Low, constant, like it saw something we didn't. I opened the window just a crack. Smoke, thick and distant. A fire, east of the hill. Not natural, controlled. A signal. He joined me at the window. "They're drawing us out," he said, "but they don't know we've already seen it." Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the old soldier behind his eyes. "They want a story? Fine. Let's write one they'll never forget." We waited until morning. Then we walked toward the smoke. Not to fight. Not yet. But to see. To know. What we found was worse than expected. 3 bodies. Hung from trees. Each one wearing a mask hand-carved painted red. A symbol carved into their chests. A circle split by a dagger. His face went pale. "That's not just your people," he whispered. "That's older than all of us." Then he took a step back. "They've called something else." I turned to him. "What does that mean?" He looked like he didn't want to say, but he did. "It means this isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's a ritual. We burned the bodies. Not out of respect, but to stop whatever they were trying to summon." He recited something as the flames rose. Not in English, not in any language I recognized. I asked him what it meant. He said, "It's something I learned a long time ago. It means, you will not take another." That night, as the fire burned in the forest behind us, I finally asked the question I'd been holding. "Is he really your brother?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Yes, once." I waited. He sighed. He was brilliant. Dangerous. He saw patterns in things no one else did. But he believed in control above all else. Said pain made people obedient. Said obedience made peace. He paused. And when I disagreed, he made me watch him prove it. He swallowed hard. "So what did you do?" He looked at the window. I walked away. I shook my head. "No, you ran." He didn't deny it, just stared at the trees. And he realized, this wasn't just my past catching up to us. It was his too. The night before everything changed, we sat by the fire one last time. No words. No plans. Just 2 people who knew they might not see another dawn. And as I drifted into sleep, I felt something strange. Not fear. Not anger. But peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. We woke before the sun. There was something strange about the air, not just cold, but charged. Like the sky was waiting to split open. I could feel it in my fingertips. So could he. He didn't speak, just loaded the rifle with movements too careful to be casual. The dog refused to leave the front door. It just sat there, ears pinned back, tail unmoving. We were being watched. Not the way we had been before, not from a distance. This time, it was close. In the trees, in the silence, in the stillness before the first shot. We didn't wait. He led me out the back way, through the dense brush behind the shed. We followed the trap line, stepping only where we knew was safe. We moved low, tight, fast. My heart felt like a drum in my throat. Every breath hurt. Every snapped twig made me flinch. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of failing him. We reached the creek bed by sunrise. He motioned for me to crouch behind a fallen log. Then he whispered, "They're already here." I saw the first one through the trees dressed in black, face covered, blade in hand. He moved like he belonged to the shadows. Another followed, then a third. They were coordinated, trained. Their formation was tight, and they carried themselves like men who had never had to run from anything in their lives. But they weren't the ones I feared. It was the 4th man who terrified me. Because he didn't wear a mask. He wore a grin, and that grin belonged to someone I'd seen in my nightmares. Someone from the compound. A man who'd once held my head under ice water until I stopped moving. They called him Crow, and he had found me again. He didn't speak, just raised one finger, pointed in our direction, and just like that, the trap was sprung. The air erupted in noise gunfire, screaming, crashing limbs. Glass bottles shattered from the roof of the cabin, raining down like shrapnel. Ropes snapped tight, sending one of them flipping into a pit filled with sharpened stakes. Another triggered a tripwire and caught a blade to the throat. But Crow didn't flinch. He moved through the chaos like a ghost. Even as one of his men fell to his knees, choking on blood, Crow just kept walking straight toward the log where we were hiding. The old man grabbed my wrist. "Now," he whispered. We ran. Bullets tore through the trees behind us. Bark exploded into splinters. The dog ran beside me, silent, fast. My legs burned. My lungs begged for air, but I didn't stop. We reached the ravine. He jumped first, landing hard, rolling, already up with his weapon aimed. I jumped too. My ankle twisted on landing, but I kept moving. We scrambled deeper into the woods, ducking under branches, pushing through thorns. We could hear them behind us, not chasing blindly, but hunting, flanking. "They want you alive," he said, panting. "How do you know?" He looked at me. "Because they haven't shot you yet." We reached the second cabin by midday. It was older, smaller, half buried in vines and rot. He said he built it years ago, for emergencies. Inside, it smelled like dust and oil. The floor creaked under our weight. We didn't speak as we blocked the windows and laid out our weapons. I wrapped my ankle with cloth. He cleaned a shallow cut on his arm without even flinching. Then he handed me a small iron key. "If I don't make it," he said, "you go to the root cellar behind the barn. Open the hatch. There's a map. Names. Places. You run and you burn what's left." I shook my head. "No." But he just stared. "I need you to listen." And I did, because part of me already knew what was coming. That night, it rained. A hard, cold, endless rain, the kind that drowns sounds and carries screams farther than you want them heard. We stayed inside, waiting, breathing. He told me not to sleep, but I did, just for a moment. And that's all it took. I woke to the sound of splintering wood. The door was cracked open. Rain poured in. The dog was growling deep in its throat. He was gone. I grabbed the rifle and limped outside. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash, I saw him. Pinned to the wall by two masked men, one held a knife at his throat. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me. "Run!" he shouted. He didn't. I fired. The first shot missed. The second didn't. One of them dropped, screaming, clutching his shoulder. The other lunged at me. I tripped, fell hard. The rifle skidded into the mud. The blade was raised. And then, a sound like thunder. The old man had a knife in his hand. Now the other man had it in his chest. We didn't stop to think. We ran, together, bleeding, limping, breathless, but alive. We reached the barn before sunrise. The sky was burning red now. Not metaphorically, literally. They'd set the forest on fire. Smoke poured through the trees. Flames licked the sky. The world was collapsing behind us, piece by piece. But we didn't stop. He opened the hatch to the root cellar, pushed me down. "I'll hold them off." I grabbed his coat. "No." He looked down at me, face covered in blood and ash. "You're the only one who can end this." He shoved the key into my hand and closed the hatch. I waited in the dark. Minutes, maybe hours. I could hear the fire above me. I could hear the voices. I could hear his voice. Crow, taunting. "You always pick the broken ones, don't you? Just like back then." And then I heard a scream. Not his. Someone else's. Then silence. Complete, suffocating silence. When I climbed out, the world had changed. The forest was black. Ash covered the earth. Bodies lay in the dirt. But there was no sign of Crow. No sign of the old man. Just smoke and the sound of wind through broken trees. I buried what was left. A knife, a jacket, a locket with a faded photo. Then I took the map, took the names, took the key, and walked. Not because I wanted to, but because I owed him that much. The story wasn't over. Not yet. He once told me that ghosts don't haunt places, they haunt people. And I was carrying all of them now. But I would make them matter. Every scar, every scream, every drop of blood. I would turn them into something more, something stronger, something dangerous. Because the boy they chased was gone. And in his place walked someone they should have never created. The forest was a graveyard. The blackened trees stretched like skeletal fingers toward a sky stained with smoke and ash. The silence was heavier than any words could be, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Every step I took on the scorched earth cracked like brittle bones beneath my feet. I carried his coat in my hands, the fabric torn, soaked in blood and soot. It smelled like the man who'd saved me again and again, the man who had vanished into that fire, swallowed by the flames, and the men who hunted us. I wasn't sure if he was alive or dead, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back, not now. The map burned in my pocket like a secret, its edges curled and fragile. It wasn't just a collection of names and places, it was a guide to everything I needed to understand. Every name was a thread. Every place a knot in the web of lies that had ensnared me since the beginning. As I walked through the wasteland of trees, I thought about the old man's words. Ghosts don't haunt places, they haunt people. And I was haunted. Haunted by the ghosts of my past, by the faces of those I had lost, by the pain that still burned in my bones. But I wasn't just haunted. I was angry, furious, and that fire inside me was growing. I found shelter in the ruins of a cabin, its walls barely standing but still offering refuge. Inside, I laid out the map on the rickety table and traced the lines with trembling fingers. The names stared back at me, people I barely knew, places I had only heard whispered in the dead of night. The first stop was a small village on the edge of the forest, a place called Ravensbrook. The old man had marked it with a symbol, a crow in flight. I knew why. The journey was long and lonely. My ankle ached with every step and hunger gnawed at my insides like a wild animal. But I pushed forward, driven by something I couldn't name. In the distance, I could see the lights of Ravensbrook flickering through the trees. It was a small place, a cluster of wooden houses, smoke rising from chimneys, children's laughter carried on the wind. For a moment, I wondered if I could forget everything here, if I could find peace. But peace was a lie. As I entered the village, the faces turned toward me, curious, suspicious. I didn't belong here. I was the boy who ran through fire and blood, the boy with the haunted eyes and the stolen past. But I had a mission, and I wasn't going to fail. At the center of Ravensbrook, I met an old woman named Mabel. Her eyes were sharp, and her hands steady as she handed me a cup of warm broth. "You're far from home, child," she said, her voice rough but kind. "What brings you here?" I hesitated. Then I showed her the map. She studied it carefully, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "The names on this map are enemies of the crown, people who defied the darkness." Mabel told me stories of rebellion and sacrifice, of hope and loss. She spoke of a hidden resistance, a network of survivors fighting to reclaim their world from the shadows, and she offered me a choice. Stay, fight, or run. I thought about running, about leaving the ashes behind and disappearing into the night. But I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. I had to fight. For him. For the old man. For the boy who had no future but a past full of scars. Mabel handed me a small package. Inside was a knife, sharpened and balanced, and a letter sealed with crimson wax. "Take this to the others," she said. "Tell them the boy from the fire has come." As I left Ravensbrook, I felt the weight of destiny settle on my shoulders. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but I was ready. The nights were cold and unforgiving. I slept beneath the stars, the dog curled at my feet, ever watchful. I learned to listen to the wind, to the trees, to the distant echoes of footsteps that might be friend or foe. Each day brought new challenges, wild animals, treacherous paths, the constant threat of those who hunted me. But each night, I grew stronger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself at the edge of a vast valley. The letter in my pocket burned like fire. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. "Meet us at the old mill by moonrise. Bring the key." My heart pounded. This was it. The next step. The beginning of the end. As I approached the mill, shadows shifted around me. I wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, warriors, survivors, faces marked by pain and determination. They welcomed me without question. The boy from the fire was no longer alone. Inside the mill, plans were drawn, weapons sharpened, alliances forged. I learned that the resistance had suffered many losses. Crow was their greatest enemy, ruthless, cunning, and merciless. But they had hope now, because I was here. That night, as the moon cast silver light through broken windows, I looked around at the faces of those ready to fight. For freedom, for justice, for the future. I realized that this was more than a battle. It was a legacy, and I was ready to claim it. The wind howled through the broken walls of the old mill like a ghost's lament, carrying with it the echoes of past battles and forgotten promises. We had gathered in the dim light, a ragtag group of survivors bound by a common enemy and a shared hope that flickered stubbornly against the looming darkness. I looked around at their faces worn, fierce, some scarred, others haunted, but all carrying the weight of loss and determination. It was in that moment I realized how far I had come. I was no longer just the boy running from his past. I was part of something larger, something that mattered. The leader of this resistance was a woman named Alara. Her eyes burned with a fierce intelligence that seemed to see right through to your soul. She had lost everything to Crow, the ruthless tyrant whose shadow stretched across the land like a plague. Her story was etched in every line on her face, in every steady breath she took as she spoke. "We fight because we have no other choice," she told us. "Crow will not stop until every last spark of freedom is crushed. But we will be the flame that refuses to die." Her words settled over us like a cloak, warm and heavy. I felt the old fire rise inside Meth, fire that had been buried beneath ashes and sorrow for so long. We were not just fighting for ourselves, we were fighting for those who could not fight anymore. For the past, for the future, for family. The plans laid before us were meticulous, each detail sharpened by the pain of countless failures. We had to infiltrate Crow's stronghold, a fortress built not just of stone but of fear and lies. Intelligence gathered from spies and whispers told us of a weakness in old tunnel system beneath the fortress that had been sealed off decades ago, but still existed. It was our only chance. The key I carried, the one Mabel had entrusted me with, was rumored to open the ancient gates that led into those tunnels. As the hours crept forward, the group's energy shifted between hope and doubt. Some had lost faith. Others clung to it desperately. I saw in their eyes reflections of my own, struggle with the fear of the unknown, the weight of what was at stake. I spoke to them quietly, trying to share the strength I had found buried deep inside me. "We have to believe in something," I said softly. "Not just in victory, but in ourselves, in each other." The night deepened, and a cold rain began to fall outside, tapping against the broken windows like distant drums calling us to war. I lay awake on the cold floor, my dog curled beside me, his breath steady and calm. For a moment, I let the memories flood in the old man's kindness, the faces of those lost, the fire that had tried to consume me. But then I pushed them away. There was no time for doubt now. Tomorrow, everything would change. At dawn, we moved as one, shadows slipping through the forest toward the fortress that had long been a symbol of terror. My heart pounded with every step, each beat a drum of war inside my chest. The dog stayed close, sensing the tension that threaded through the air. We reached the crumbling wall that marked the boundary between what was lost and what could be reclaimed. I took the key from my pocket, the metal cold and heavy in my palm. With trembling hands, I found the hidden lock, covered in moss and nearly forgotten. The lock clicked open like a secret being whispered to the earth. The heavy stone door groaned as it swung inward, revealing the darkness beneath a labyrinth of tunnels, narrow and winding. We slipped inside, swallowed by the black. The air was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the faint drip of water echoing through the tunnels. Each step was a risk. The walls seemed to close in, threatening to suffocate the hope we carried. We moved carefully, knowing that Crow's patrols could be anywhere, that a single misstep would mean death. Hours passed in tense silence until we reached a chamber deep beneath the fortress. It was here we found the heart of Crow's power, a place where he and his closest men gathered. A room filled with maps, weapons, and secrets. This was the moment we had fought for. Alara signaled for us to hold position while she crept forward to gather information. Her stealth was ghost-like, and I felt pride mixed with fear watching her move. When she returned, her face was grim but determined. "We strike tonight," she whispered. "We take the fortress by storm. No more hiding." I felt the weight of her words settle in my bones. There was no turning back. As the sun set, we prepared for battle. The fortress loomed around us, a monstrous silhouette against the blood-red sky. The resistance gathered their weapons, steeling themselves for the fight that would decide the fate of everything we held dear. I stood at the forefront, the knife in my hand, a reminder of all I had lost and all I still had to protect. My dog growled low, his eyes shining with fierce loyalty. The old fire in my chest roared awake. When the first arrows flew and the clash of steel rang through the night, I realized this was not just a battle for survival, it was a reckoning. The fight was brutal, savage. Every corner of the fortress echoed with shouts and the sound of breaking bones. I moved through the chaos, my senses sharpened by adrenaline and the memory of the old man's sacrifice. At one point, I found myself face to face with one of Crow's lieutenants, a giant, of a man whose eyes were cold and merciless. The fight was a blur of motion and pain. The dog leapt to my side, teeth bared, as I drove the knife deep into my enemy's side. The man fell with a final, strangled breath, and I knew I had taken a step closer to justice. Hours blurred into one another, but slowly, inexorably, the fortress began to fall. Crow's men faltered, their fear growing with each loss. The resistance pressed forward, fueled by hope and vengeance. Finally, as the first light of dawn pierced the darkness, I found myself standing before Crow. He was everything I had feared, and more tall, cruel, his eyes burning with madness. He sneered as we faced each other, the weight of 1,000 broken lives hanging between us. "You think you can defeat me?" he spat. "You are nothing but a child." I looked into his eyes, feeling the fire inside me burn hotter than ever. "I am more than you'll ever understand," I said. The final battle was fierce, every moment a test of will and strength. Crow fought like a demon possessed. But I fought for more than myself. I fought for the old man, for Mabel, for Alara, for the countless faces lost to darkness. With one last surge of strength, I landed the blow that ended it. Crow collapsed, his reign of terror broken. As he fell, the fortress began to crumble around us, the walls shaking and stones falling like rain. We fled into the daylight, the dawn washing over us like a promise. I stood on the hill, overlooking the ruined fortress, my dog at my side, the sky alive with color and hope. The fight had changed everything. I was no longer just a boy running from shadows. I was a survivor, a warrior, a beacon for those who still believed. The past was ashes, but from those ashes, something new would rise. And this time, I was ready. The morning sun bled over the horizon like a wound opening across the sky. Its crimson light spilled into the remnants of Crow's shattered fortress, casting long shadows over broken stones and silent halls. We had survived the night, but the war was far from over. The air was thick with the scent of dust, blood, and the uneasy calm before a final storm. I stood at the edge of the battlefield, my dog beside me, both of us breathing heavily, hearts still pounding from the chaos. The faces of those lost haunted my mind, Alara's steely resolve, the old man's gentle wisdom, Mabel's quiet strength. Each of them a thread woven into the tapestry of my journey, each a reason why I could not, would not, turn back now. Our victory had been hard won, but Crow's shadow lingered like a dark fog. His death was not the end of the terror he had sown. Rumors whispered that loyalists still hid in the shadows, waiting to rise, waiting to reclaim the power he had lost. The fortress, though crumbled, was a symbol that evil could be buried but never fully destroyed. We had torn down the walls, but what lay beyond was still unknown, a wilderness of fear and uncertainty. Elara gathered us once more, her voice steady but worn. "We've taken a great step forward," she said, "but we must not let our guard down. The fight is not just against one man. It is against the darkness in all of us, against the lies that let tyranny grow." Her words weighed on me heavily. I thought about the old man who had told me that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. I thought about Mabel, whose kindness had rekindled a hope I thought was lost. I thought about my own reflection in the mirror after the battle, scarred, tired, but unbroken. The fight had changed me. It had stripped away the boy who once hid behind silence and shadows and forged something stronger. But strength was a double-edged sword. It could build, but it could also destroy. The days after the battle were a blur of preparation and recovery. We tended to the wounded, buried the dead, and fortified what remained. We worked as one, bound by shared purpose and haunted memories. My dog never left my side, his presence a quiet reminder that I was not alone. At night, I would stare at the stars, trying to find meaning in their cold light. The future stretched before me, uncertain and fragile, like a thread in the wind. One evening, as the camp settled into uneasy rest, I found myself drawn to the ruins of the fortress. The stone walls, half buried in moss and shadow, seemed to whisper secrets of old. I traced my fingers along the cracked stones, feeling the weight of history beneath my skin. That was when I heard a faint rustling, a whisper of movement in the darkness. My breath caught, heart racing. I was no stranger to danger, but this felt different, closer, more personal. Suddenly, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a man cloaked in tattered black, his eyes gleaming with cold fire. He was not one of Crow's loyalists, but something else entirely. A messenger, a harbinger. "You think this is the end?" he said, his voice a low hiss. "You have only scratched the surface." His words sent a chill through me, a warning of the battles yet to come. I realized then that the true enemy was not just a man or a fortress, but the darkness that thrived in the hearts of men, the fear, the hatred, the greed that allowed Crow to rise in the first place. The fight would never be over. It was a cycle, a storm that would return again and again until broken by those brave enough to face it. I stood my ground, feeling the fire within me flare. "Then we will fight again," I said quietly. "Not for revenge, but for something better. For hope." The man vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my soul. I knew I could not face this alone. I needed the strength of those who believed in the dawn, who would stand with me no matter the cost. In the following days, I sought out those who had lost their way in the darkness, those who had been forgotten or betrayed. I told them our story, the story of courage, sacrifice, and the power of choice. Slowly, hands reached out, hearts opened. We were no longer just a resistance. We were a movement, a spark that could ignite a fire to cleanse the shadows. But with hope came danger. Whispers of our rising reached ears that would silence us with fire and blood. We were hunted, chased like ghosts through the ruins and forests. Every step was a risk, every breath a gamble. Yet we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that surrender meant the death of everything we cherished. One night, Beneath a sky heavy with stars, I found myself sitting beside the dying embers of a fire. My dog rested his head on my lap, his warm breath steady and calm. I thought about all we had lost and all we still had to fight for. The road ahead was dark, uncertain, but it was ours, and as long as we held on to hope, we would never walk alone. The dawn was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The night before the final battle was silent, unnervingly so. The kind of silence that feels heavier than thunder, pressing on your chest with the weight of what's to come. Around the campfire, faces worn and lined with exhaustion looked toward the horizon where the first pale light of dawn would soon rise. The city, now a scarred shell of stone and shadow, waited. The enemy waited, and so did we. I sat with my dog close, the only sound the quiet crackling of embers and the steady rhythm of his breath. The air smelled of cold earth and old memories, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I thought of everyone who had stood with me, who had fallen beside me, who had dared to dream of a world not ruled by fear and hate. There was no turning back. This was the moment where legends were born or shattered forever. When the sun finally crested the horizon, bleeding light over the broken walls and twisted steel, we rose as one. No words were spoken, because none were needed. Our hearts beat the same Druma pulse of courage, of defiance, of hope that refused to die. The enemy poured out of the shadows like a dark flood, but we met them with fire and steel and unyielding will. The battle was brutal, raw, and merciless. Every strike carried the weight of a lifetime's pain. Every breath was a testament to survival. I fought not just for myself, but for every soul crushed beneath the tyranny we sought to end. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Alara, her eyes blazing with fierce light, cutting through the smoke like a beacon. The old man, frail but unbroken, moved with a quiet strength that belied his years. Mabel's voice rang out, steady and sure, rallying those around her. We were not just fighting a battle, we were reclaiming our very humanity. As the sun climbed higher, the tide began to turn. The darkness wavered and fell back, unable to withstand the force of our united hearts. Crow's loyalists broke, scattered like ash in the wind. The fortress, once a symbol of fear, crumbled into dust. But the true victory was more than the fall of walls or enemies. It was the reclaiming of light in places long shadowed. It was the courage to hope when all seemed lost. It was the knowing that even in our deepest scars, we carried the seeds of a new beginning. When the dust finally settled, I stood on the battlefield, bloodied and weary, but alive. My dog pressed against my side, a steady anchor in a sea of change. Around me, faces broke into smiles and tears, raw, honest, free. We had won. But the story did not end there, because victory is not a single moment. It is the long journey afterward, the choice to build, to forgive, to heal. It is the strength to stand when the world asks you to fall. And that is the story I tell now. To you. Yes, you who listen to this tale in the quiet of your own dawn. Know this. No matter how dark the night, no matter how fierce the storm, you carry within you the same light that banished the shadows from that broken fortress. You are the hope. You are the courage. You are the dawn. Sorrise. Stand tall and fight not with swords or fury, but with your heart, your voice, your unyielding spirit, because the world needs your light. This is not just a story of a boy, an old man, and a dog. It is a call to awaken the hero inside us all. The dawn is waiting. Will you answer? If this story moved you, inspired you, or stirred something deep inside it, keep it to yourself. Share it with those who need to hear it, because every light shines brighter when we let it reach others. Subscribe, follow, and join this journey, because together we become unstoppable. Thank you for walking this path with me. The dawn is ours.